Oh my goodness. It's another week. We're here. We're back. It's been a busy week. I was in production hell all last week. Now you're sitting there going, Darryl, I wish I was in production hell. Do you know how many times I dialed the phone, how many emails sent, and how many times I try to reach out to people on LinkedIn and be nice and tell them all the wonderful things about them and why they should care about me? Shut up already about your production hell. You're sitting there, you're talking head, you're talking to a microphone, whatever, nobody cares. You know what? You're right. You're 100% right. Your job is harder in that regard, and I applaud you for it, which is why we have this little chat every single week. But, my friends, that does not mean that my job is without stress, just like your job. And I'll give you some examples because I get this a lot, and which is interesting, right? So I'll draw some I'll tell the story, and then I'll draw some corollaries for you. So I get people all the time when I talk to them about maybe building a personal brand or getting out there more, making more of a name for themselves, establishing their street cred more, all the usual stuff. That, you know, they've just gotta be visible, right? And that can be video, that can be audio, that can be content, that can be public speaking. But the whole point is that if you want to be taken credible, you've got to be a thought leader. You don't need to be a best-selling author like we seem to have a lot of on the Inside Sales Show. Because, by the way, I'm not. You don't need to be Tony Robbins. You don't need to be, a celebrity. You just need to be kick ass at what you do. And when I say this to people, this is what my number one thing I get all the time from them. They're like, yeah, but Darryl, I'm not you. And it's so easy for you. And I'm not you. I have no desire. I don't want to do that. It's not how I'm wired. I'm just really good at what I do, and I just want to do what I do. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Which is not unlike, somebody who's, say, maybe my age, getting a new sales job and saying, I don't want to do social media because, it's just not what I do. I'm really good at other stuff. I just don't want to do that. Or someone who's really young saying, I don't want to do the phone. Who needs the phone? No one uses the phone anymore. You see what I'm getting at? We all have our own excuses. And that's what they are. They're excuses. They literally are excuses. We've talked about this before. I want you to stop for a second. And if I were to ask you, this is just you and I here right now. No one else is listening. If I were to ask you, what's the number one thing that you're making an excuse for? You need to do, but you're making it an excuse. Okay, that thought, because I know you had one. That thought we need to overcome. I'm going to table that for a second. Overcoming. For me, I tell people, dude, you think it's easy for me? I got news for you. The first time I got on stage, the first time I started doing video or first time I got on radio or whatever, it was stressful. And guess what? The second time, it was stressful. Third time, stressful. By the 42 millionth time, it was a little less stressful. But even now, I will go and I'll have conversations with people whom I respect and revere, who I'm as much of a fanboy as you are. We may often travel in the same circles, speak at the same events, but I'm a fanboy. If I had a little autograph book, I'd be walking up to them saying, please sign my autograph book. That'd be me. And I might work with them, and I'm going to meet them for the first time, or maybe I'm meeting them like on a webinar or a podcast for the first time. I got butterflies. I'm freaked out. But I know, and here's the thing, I know I have a job to do, and I'm paid well to show up and do what I do. Generate noise, generate leads, generate demand, generate sales, whatever it may be. That's what I'm paid to do. And so I have to do it. So I talked about, let's table that for a second, that part where you were scared, right? You were uncertain, you were reticent, you knew what you needed to do, but you didn't want to do it. Well, you know what that involves? It involves the exact same thing it has when I get on stage sometimes, and that is courage. Courage, guys. It's not a matter of fear. It's not a matter, courage overcomes fear, but it's not a matter of that you shouldn't do it. It's not a matter of you don't know you should do it. It's a matter of overcoming that fear with courage. So now, how does that play out? Is it a speaking event? Is it you making a dial when you don't want to use the phone? Or you posting on social media when you're not comfortable with social media? Absolutely. All the above. It all starts with courage. And then it just permeates the entire sales cycle. What do you say when someone answers that phone for the first time on a prospecting call when you're brand new to the company? What do? Do you stammer? Do you stumble? Or do you buck up, put your courage forth, and say, I got this? What do you do when you know the prospect's hungry and they're going to string you out as long as you want to, but you got to go for the close now. You got to interrupt that flow, possibly affect the relationship. It takes courage. So today, I wanted to just talk about something we've never talked about before. I mean, we talked about it in bits and pieces, but I've never explicitly talked about courage. What is courage? What are the components of courage? Where do you need to apply courage? And how do you apply that courage in a structured format, a structured way? So I said to myself, Prail, who's the best person for this? And I said, well, clearly we know it's Shari Levitin. Have you met Shari? Oh my gosh, if you've not met Shari, this is my description of her. I hope that she doesn't yell at me. She is a spitfire. She's a ball of energy. She just goes. She's always moving. And she, like, these pearls of wisdom come out of her mouth nonstop. I sit back as somebody who's public off to myself, and I want to be her when I grow up. So I said, Shari, you should come on the show. Now, Shari's the author of Heart and Sell, not to be confused with Heart and Soul, but I think it may be intentional. Heart and Sell, 2 universal truths every salesperson needs to know. And we're going to talk about that today. You can meet her at ShariLevitin.com. She's on Twitter. She's on LinkedIn. Great YouTube channel under Levitin Group. Check it all out if you're sitting at your desk while you're listening to this. If you're in your drive-in, you're working out listening to this, all good, because you know what? I'm going to shut up. Shari, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Darryl. And I'm sorry you've been in production hell. And hopefully we're going to get everybody out of sales hell today, if anybody's in sales hell.
It is in sales hell. Now, and we don't want to be in sales unless the sales hell is us just having too many deals to close, in which case, it's something that we'll all endure, I'm sure. One of the things I wanted to hit you up on specifically as it relates to this, Shari, was in your book, you talked about the lion in The Wizard of Oz. And I thought that would be a great way to open up today's conversation. And so let me set the stage. What can we learn from the lion in The Wizard of Oz?
Well, if you remember now, Wizard of Oz was probably my favorite thing to watch every single year as a kid. And my favorite character was the lion. And I may be bringing some of you way back, but the lion was traveling far and along the yellow brick road because he wanted what? Courage. And he thought that he needed to go somewhere in order to get this courage. And of course, he traveled all the way to the Emerald City. He met the great Oz, and he thought Oz would give him this courage. And of course, then the curtain fell away, only to reveal a funny little man behind a curtain moving levers. So the wizard couldn't give the lion courage any more than anyone else can give us courage. We have to earn it. And the way we earn courage is by taking action. Action cures fear. Mark Twain said that. And what I also love is if you look at the root word of courage, the C-O-U-R, it stems from the word heart. Now, my book is Heart and Sell. And I truly believe that we have to balance heart and authenticity, empathy with courage, or the need to roll up our sleeves and make the sale. But when we understand that the root word heart is in the word courage, we realize that if we care about our products, if we care about our customers enough, and if we care enough about making our customers' lives better, then we can muster up the courage to ask the difficult questions, to isolate the objections, to call the difficult prospects, and ultimately make the sale.
All right. So I opened up in my opening spiel talking about how many people know that there's something that they're avoiding. They don't want to do it. It either scares them away, so they'll do everything but that. And many of us don't want to own it. But what kind of, I guess, does owning it play a factor in our ability to muster courage, or not? I mean, just throw that out there. You tell me.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it all starts with the mindset, right? And changing your relationship to your fear. And that all begins with owning it. I'm going to tell you one word that'll change your life. I happened to have a great mentor. And when I wasn't hitting my numbers, he said, Shari, if you change the pronoun, you'll change your life. I said, well, what do you mean change the pronoun? What's the pronoun? He says, well, whenever you don't make a deal, you say things like they couldn't afford it. They needed to think about it. He said, so what you're doing is you're not owning it. When we blame external factors for our lack of courage or our lack of success, we give up our power. He made me change the pronoun to say, I didn't show them the value, not they couldn't afford it. I wasn't allowed to say, for example, they needed to think about it. I had to change the pronoun, and I had to say, I didn't create enough urgency. So before we can really look at having courage, we have to realize that we own our success as well as our failures. We can't take the glory for being great if we won't take the responsibility when we're not. I have the ability to change the trajectory of my life by first taking responsibility and then having the courage to make the tough calls, the tough decisions, and ask the tough questions.
So I'm curious, when you do your sales training, you talk to reps and whatnot, and you have this conversation with them, how well do they generally react to that? Because I guess I would ask the question, is their first reaction, just like they were blaming them, they didn't have the budget, they didn't have the urgency. Do they blame you? You don't understand, you don't get me, you don't know my sales problem. Or do you find as a whole reps will willingly accept that critique?
The top ones do. That is the mindset of the top sellers I've ever met in my life. And they also realize that when someone else, somewhere else is doing it to us, and as long as we have that attitude, we're actually losing our power. And so it's a matter of getting your power back. And everybody wants power, Darryl. So if we phrase it that way, and I say to you, look, you want the power. That's why you're in sales. You want the power to make as much money as you possibly can. And I got to tell you, there's other sellers selling the same thing, and they have the same leads, and they're making more money than us. So if we start by owning it, that's the first step to courage.
So I guess I would throw this out here for the reps listening who struggle with this. We can deny it, you can avoid it, you can deflect it. I'm not judging, you be you, but to Shari's point is, what do you value more? Do you value that control where you say it's not me, it's them, and I'm in control and there's nothing wrong with me? Or do you value that paycheck and that commission, and in that shiny object that you get up for every day to do your job, whether it's to put food on the table or buy the next car or buy that dream house or go on a wonderful vacation, whatever your motivation is, what do you value more? Because if you value that shiny object more, then it starts with a little bit of humility and a little bit, I talk about this as self-awareness. Any success I've had is because I've been self-aware, I've been weak. Now, the example I'll use, and like I've shared this before, is when I did push back. What I was talking about, what Shari's talking about here, and I didn't accept it. She says the top ones accept it. Well, there's many times I wasn't the top one. And what I ended up having to do to people was I finally had to say to people, okay, so you think I do this, and I don't think I do, and I think you're wrong. Fine. Next time you see me doing it, you just stop me right there in the middle of the conversation and say, boom, you're doing it. And you just got to say those 3 words, you're doing it. And I'll know exactly what you're talking about. And when they've done that to me, I'm in the moment, I go, oh my gosh, they're right. And then I changed my behavior. My life got way better. So don't view this as you're giving up your own pride or ego. What you're doing instead is you're investing in yourself to achieve the goals you want. And this is just a growing curve along the way. We're going to drill down on how to do this. But we're going to take a quick little break. So don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're going to finish the conversation on mindset. And then Shari's got 3 tactics to help you approach this. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. All right, so Shari, you've talked about mindset before on the show in past episodes, and it's really a little bit of dealing with your own fears. Like, so the example I use is having the right mindset to do cold calling, knowing that there could be rejection, people hanging up on you, arguing, yelling, whatever it might be. Part of this is mindset to take responsibility, to own it, but how do you deal with I think there is a fear of being rejected, a fear of asking for a close, a fear of responding to an objection without offending the individual. Are there tips and tricks you've learned or you can advise on how to have the right mindset?
Yeah. One more thing on mindset before what I'd love to get into is some tactics on how to actually close sales and have the courage to do that. But I was told a long time ago, the call you're afraid to make is the call you must make. The thing you're afraid to do, and you started off the show with this, Darryl, and I tell people, make a list of the 10 things, even the 3 things that scare you the most. The big ones like, oh my gosh, if only this happened, then this would happen. Who are the people that you're scared to call, the accounts that you're scared to call on? And do it. Action cures fear. And it also takes creativity. I get really tired of listening to reps, whether they're SDRs or account executives, say, oh, I sent an email and they didn't respond. Or I left a voicemail, they didn't respond. Really? It's like, be creative, go around through on top of, like, I'll tell you what, I got to tell you a story. I got the biggest sale up in my life to that point, not by making a call, but by being creative and sending a pizza. Now you have to say, go on, Shari, I want to hear that.
Go on, Shari, I want to hear about the pizza story.
Well, what I'm trying to say is sometimes you've got to be creative. And if you just say, I left a phone message, I called, think of all the different, if you've got that big client that you want to get in front of, think of all the creative things you could do to get in front of that client. We've got to do what no one else will do. Now, video is a great way to do that today. I'm telling you, I try to think of what is the most off-the-wall, bizarre, creative thing I can do. I had a guy once named Simon. I knew that he was my ideal client. I knew that he probably wanted to work with me, but every time I called his assistant, he's in a meeting. He's in a meeting. Thinking, for God's sakes, does Simon ever eat? He's always in a meeting. So finally, one day I called. He was in a meeting. It was 11:30 in the morning. And I said to his assistant, I said, listen, has Simon eaten lunch? And she says, no, why? I said, well, what's the best pizza place in town? She says, Polly's down the street. Now, this is back in the day. I said, okay, listen what I'm going to do. I'm going to order a pizza for Simon and everybody in the conference. And then I'm going to fax, this is a long time ago, fax you a poem. And I want you to put it on top of the pizza box. And the poem read, is it sunny or is it raining? It's always a good time for online training. I know you're busy playing businessman and banker, but isn't it time we set down our anchor? So when you've eaten that last pepperoni, pick up the phone and let's make some money. So
what I love about that, let me share another story to you about being gorilla. So the actual recruiter who placed me here at VanillaSoft, his name is David Perry, he's best-selling author, written a series of books called Guerrilla Marketing for Job Hunters. Every sales rep should read this book, not to find your job, I'm sure use it that way, but just for the guerrilla tactics. So I'll use an example. One of the tactics he did, he really wanted to get a hold of this executive. This is building on off your pizza story. And he wouldn't, the executive would never call him. He knew the executive was a good fit for his person looking to fill a role. And so finally what he did was he actually went to this food truck that stopped by the office every single day where the executive worked, and he paid the guy, I don't know, $100, $200, whatever, say, let
So
me
good.
run the
So
truck
good.
today. Exactly. And finally the executive comes up to
So
get a
good.
sandwich, and he says, boom, I've been trying to get a hold of you. You know, why you... And he got the deal. Gorilla, you thinking outside the box. All right. You talked about taking the story, our courage, the whole use of it, the mindset, owning it, everything else, and applying it to real life tactics. So going from the soft, ooey gooey stuff into hardcore, actionable stuff. So you mentioned closing. So let's talk about closing. How does courage apply to closing? What's the process according to the great, the mighty Shari Levitin?
Well, let me first just say that closing is something you do through the entire sales conversation, through the whole process. So you've got to be in your discovery, asking those tough questions that take courage, which is the subject of another webinar. But what a lot of sales reps don't know how to do is when it is time to ask for the money. I saw a statistic, 24% of sales reps never even ask for the order. Oh my God, that just kills me. But it takes courage, but it also takes patience. You talked about the emotional intelligence skill of self-awareness, but it takes patience and it actually takes empathy to close. What do I mean by that? 3 things every rep needs to do when they're actually asking for the money, and it rhymes, so we should be able to remember it. We need to validate, change the state, and isolate. So now the default behavior for most sales reps, I find, is they've got all these scripts. The customer says, oh, we're using another vendor, or, we'll let you know in Q3. And they'll say, well, I can understand that, but what is it about the other vendor that you like better than us? Like they've got this sort of objection handling script, right? Which never works, because what we have to understand is that we can't move somebody to our side of the table unless we're willing to move to their side of the table. So when somebody throws out an objection, a concern, the first thing we need to do is really listen. Slow down, count to 3, take a deep breath. And by the way, this works when you're at a party and you're debating over whether global warming is a hoax or global warming is for real, whether we should have a wall or we shouldn't have. I mean, this is why we're so polarized as a nation, is because we're not seeking to understand. Okay, we're not listening. So the first thing we need to do is validate. That necessitates listening. And then you might want to say something like, I can totally appreciate that. Or even, tell me more. Oh, you think global warming is a hoax. Tell me about that. What do you know about that? Now, in the case of a customer, it's going to sound more like, well, your price is too high, or we need to talk to somebody else. I completely understand. This is a big decision. You want to validate. That makes sense. So we're validating the customer's concerns, and you want to even validate the emotion behind the words, which is tricky for a lot of reps. So what I'm hearing you say is this is a big decision. There's a lot of decision makers involved, and you want to make absolutely sure that you're spending your money wisely and that you don't make the wrong decision. Is that what I hear you saying? Well, right away, this changes everything. It puts them at ease. So we're changing the emotional state first. Again, what a lot of sales reps do is they'll instantly drop the price or change the deal, not realizing the underlying psychology of why a customer is giving us an objection in the first place. And when a customer gives us an objection, they're usually in one of 3 negative emotional states. They're in the state of fear. They're in the state of suspicion. Maybe they don't trust you. Or maybe they're embarrassed. They don't understand your product. It's so complex. It's got all these bells and whistles. And what we have to understand is that we have to change the emotional state. So we go from validate to state before we change the deal. So when someone is in fear, they are in their fight or flight mode. They're going to argue with you, or they're going to bail out and not call you back. So by validating the concern first, telling them we understand how they feel, validating their emotions, you must be scared, you must be concerned. What we're doing is we're getting them into a more emotional, a sort of more receptible emotional state. Now, step 3, and this is critical, and this is where most reps fall, is we have to isolate the real concern to make sure it's the final objection and the only objection. And it really sounds something like this. Well, your price is too high. Gosh, I understand. The last thing you want to do is, do this, make a mistake. Let me ask you this. If the price was lower, is this something you'd go ahead and move forward with? Because 5 out of 10 times they'll say no, and they'll go ahead and give you the real objection. And I always say there's only 6 real objections to purchasing. The problem is too often reps are dealing with an excuse, but not the real objection. And so by going through this process, we're more apt to get to one of the 6 real objections that the customer has.
So let's recap. We've talked about the power of courage and how it starts off with actually owning it. Just take responsibility for it. And what that starts with is a mindset. And then you can use that courage in various tactics, like an example of closing, which we're doing multiple times throughout the deal. Lovely rhyming 3-prong approach. Have the courage to validate them, which will then lead to a change of state. Validate, change of state, which now allows you to isolate. And you can get down to the root cause. If you follow this, you're on the path to success. And then the courage thing becomes a non-issue because you've done it once or twice. You're like, I got this. And therefore, you never have to have that conversation that all began with by, they were unable to pay the price, because now you can say, I figured out what the problem was about price and I was able to convince them of the value. And now we have a closed deal. And it all started with courage. If you guys are just loving the fact that, this time has flown by, that Shari is a wealth of knowledge, then I'm going to tell you, reminder, she's at the Outbound Conference, outboundconference.com. You can use VS100 for VanillaSoft 100 to get some money off if you go register. But if you like Shari, check her out at Shari Levitin on Twitter, just like that. SHARI LEVITIN. Check her out on LinkedIn, or just make it easy. Go to ShariLevitin.com. With that, we're out of time, folks. I do apologize, but hey, now you've got the courage to face the rest of the day. My name is Darryl Prale. That was Shari Levitin, and this is another episode of Inside Sales. You take care. We'll talk to you soon.